Welcome back. If you have a marker in your Bible that's still at Luke 12, well done. You're in the right place. And if your eyes are on verses, what is it this time? 35 through 48, well done again. That's the text we're going to be covering. Are you ready? Is the title of this lesson. It is a very simple question, 3 words, packed with meaning in a spiritual context, from a spiritual perspective. How about some questions first? Thought questions. Have you ever taken a test ever in your life? In your academic career? In school? Surely you took tests in school. How did you know whether you were ready for a test? I said the thought questions, but I'll go ahead and tell you how I knew I was ready for a test. I wasn't, ever. I don't know. I think maybe once or twice I may have known that I was ready for a test, but that was a very extreme exception. So because of those very extreme, rare occasions, I do remember quite vividly what it felt like because it hardly ever happened. So the times it did happen, it meant a lot. Have you ever felt that you were ready for a test and then you failed when you took it? Maybe you realized as soon as the teacher put that paper on your desk, you knew you were in trouble. Maybe you thought you passed it the whole time and you didn't know until you got it back. And you don't know what happened. That's probably less common, but usually you realize how big of trouble you're in as soon as that paper hits the desk and you start looking those questions and you realize, oh boy, what have I gotten into? But on those times, you have to wonder, or ask, why did I fail? Why am I in this position? How did this happen? And you can normally come up with the answers because you weren't prepared. Even if you thought you were, you apparently weren't. Well, are you ready for the ultimate test? Are you ready for the return of Jesus? Are you ready for Jesus to return? If you could choose when Jesus is going to return, would you choose it to be soon or later? To be completely honest with you, I think most of us would probably opt for later. You don't think so?
Not me.
Well, good for you. I guess you're ready.
I've been planning for it all my life.
Okay. Been preparing most of your adult life, so...
Wouldn't it be easier for us all to go together than everybody leave them one at a time?
Well, you'll have to take that up with God. Yeah, if we had a choice. But yeah, are you ready? Many people are not ready. We hope we're ready. Many people aren't ready and they have no clue one way or another. It couldn't be farther from their minds. But are we so ready that we can't wait to hear that trumpet blast that will herald the return of Jesus, the shout of the archangel? Well, in our lesson here tonight, in this text, Luke chapter 12, that's what Jesus is dealing with. Are you ready? That's what it's talking about. Are you ready for that day? Are you ready for the end, the day? Jesus quite often just called it that day, in that day. So in Luke 12, remember, Jesus is talking to thousands of people. What we looked at this morning was still, it seems, there's no break. So he's still talking to this group of people, the same many thousands of people. Sure, some may have filed out, some may have filed in, but this very large group of people. And the last lesson dealt with laying up treasures in heaven rather than on earth, as he talked about in the Sermon on the Mount again. With the parable of the rich fool, He is described as one, or at least likened to somebody who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now he's going to transition to this new topic of being prepared for his return, being prepared for eternity. And the key really is verse 40. You must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you don't expect. Joe, do you have something?
No.
Well, you did. You were just scratching your neck? I didn't realize your neck was above your head, but, you know. It's good to know. So, and you thought you were ready, yeah. I saw it way up here, but her arms can't reach. She had to go all the way around. She had to get it.
We sing that song, and I seriously, I'm telling you, I think it's in "O Sacred Head Now Wounded," when it goes, never, oh never, let me outlive my love for thee. You can be, we all can be ready, but as the days go on, we can drift away.
Yep.
We can lose what we have. And so that's always been my prayer.
Little by little or all at once, it's a profound thought, I guess. Don't let me outlive my love for you. That's a powerful, one of those things that can resonate and stick in your mind, like I talked about earlier this morning with the other song, No One Stands Alone. So, yeah. It's a good reason to scratch our head.
Don't go to an auction.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to an auction until you get that sorted out. So Jesus teaching on being prepared. Luke chapter 12, verse 35. He's going to tell a series of parables, teachings in a parabolic way at the least. Starting with, in verse 35, what we can call the parable of the waiting servant. At least that's what our lesson's calling it. Here's what he said. Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning. We'll look at that in just a second. And be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. And if he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. So it's not exactly a parable like some of the parables Jesus told, but we can clearly see the parabolic nature of it when he starts talking about a master coming home from a wedding feast and things like that. But stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning. Your version most likely reads differently than that. I'll tell you what the Greek says, and some of the older versions say, and I kind of like vain jangling. I like the way the older versions read here. Let your loins stay girded. Now that doesn't mean as much to us as stay dressed for action, which is why some of the newer versions translate it differently. But let your loins stay girded. What does this mean? What is he talking about? Well, of course, he means stay dressed for action. What does that mean? Okay, be ready to go. Let your loins be girded about is what the old ASV says. Let your loins be girded about. That's also what the old King James says. Stay dressed for action. Now, not in a spiritual sense, but in a I guess just a practical sense, I have a habit of doing this all the time. It's just a weird mental thing for me. I just like to be ready. I don't have anywhere to go. I hardly ever go anywhere. But as soon as I wake up and brush my teeth and take a shower, my clothes are on, my shoes are on, I'm ready. If for some reason I had to go, which is usually to IGA, to get items that we apparently need, I'm ready to go. There I go. So stay dressed for action. You remember, I guess it was in the Exodus or before the Exodus, during the Passover feast or the institution of that, they were told the manner in which they were to eat it. They were to eat it in pretty descriptive terms, very specific, like have your shoes on your feet or with your belt, fastened. And it's like, that's kind of weird to tell. That's getting pretty specific. Well, the picture to paint there is you be ready to go, because as soon as this is over, I'm getting you out of here. So you be ready to go. That was the idea to put into their heads, be ready to go, stay dressed for action. And keep your lamps burning is a slightly different, angle, maybe the same principle, different angle. And it's described in this parable here, or this little parable, I guess. Be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that as soon as he knocks on that door, they can go to the door and open it. So that is where the idea of keeping your lamps burning, the lights are on, you're up. That's generally what would be indicated by the lights being on, is that you're not in bed yet. The people that live there aren't in bed yet. So as soon as that master knocks on the door, they're ready to get up, go to the door, straight to the door, open it. They're ready for him. The house is, everything's ready and in order. As soon as he knocks, open it up. He says, be like men that are doing that do that. And he says, those servants will be blessed. The ones that the master finds awake when he comes. He'll dress himself for service and have them recline at table. And he will come and serve them. And if he comes in the second watch, or even in the third, and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. What's the idea there? We get the idea of, waiting up, being ready for him to come home and you're ready to let him in. What about if he comes in the second watch or the third?
Well, let me ask this question. What's the separation of time between second and third? I mean, are we talking like 8-hour shifts, like on a, 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7?
Let me try to remember exactly the numbers. I know that the Jews had 3 watches from sunset to sunrise, and the Romans had 4 watches. And so I guess what is that? 3 watches of 4 hours each, or 4 watches of 3 hours each. So it was 6 to 9, 9 to midnight, midnight to 3, and 3 to 6 was for the Romans. So the second watch, we'll just say this is Jewish watches. The first watch would be 6 to 10. Second watch would be 10 to 2, and then the third watch would be 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. So if you're waiting up on somebody, staying up till 10 o'clock at night is nothing too outrageous, at least in our house, for us anyway. But after that, midnight comes and you're still waiting. 2 a.m. Yeah, whether they're worried or whether they were supposed to be home 3 hours ago and they still hadn't turned up. Yeah, but eventually you might think, forget it, I can't go and I can't stay up any longer. I've got to get to bed. So the idea of the second watch, this is getting not at the beginning of the second watch, but it gets deep into the night and then even deeper into the night until the sun's back up again. If he finds them awake in the second watch, or he might not come home till the third watch. And if he finds them awake, they're going to be blessed. Now, I don't know if it's worth getting into the details of what he means by he'll dress himself for service and come and serve them, other than the obvious, concept of the master serving the servants. That's interesting, and we can understand the significance of just that concept and what impact it might have on these first century listeners. It would be very unusual for that to happen in real life, for the master to serve the servants. But he's saying, he's using that as a sort of illustration or parallel. Jesus showed himself to be a servant in pretty much everything he did. So the idea is, like he says in verse 35 and 36, be like men who are waiting for their master to come home, as opposed to not waiting, as opposed to you just pack it in and go straight to bed. As soon as you're ready to go to bed, you don't have any thought for when the master comes home. It could be that some of the servants do that and some of the other servants wait up. Well, you can imagine which ones will be viewed more favorably to the master's eyes, because when you compare those that are waiting and preparing for his return versus those who just went to bed and didn't help at all. So the idea is being ready, stay dressed for action. And the reason you want to stay dressed for action, unlike with the Exodus situation, that idea was you're going to be leaving soon once you're eating this feast. So be ready to go. The idea here is you don't know when you might be leaving. So be ready. Be ready, because then you won't have to get ready. And in that sense, it's the same as the Passover. That way you don't have to get ready. You're already ready to go. So stay dressed for action. Keep your lamps burning. Be like those who are waiting for the master, their master, to come. Jesus will reward you. You will be rewarded, just like those servants will be rewarded, the ones that are awake and waiting for their master to come. Jesus told at least one other parable that's very similar to that concept. So the next one, verses 39 and 40, thief in the night. But know this, Luke 12:39, but know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, see, he just goes straight into a whole different illustration, analogy. If the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming in, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Isn't that an interesting illustration to use for himself, a thief? But the idea, there's really, if you think about it, that's one of the best things he could have used to illustrate it, because thieves are notorious for working in secrecy and coming unexpectedly. The reason is because they have to do that. They have to be come at an unexpected time, or at least when somebody leaves something alone or open, leaves the door open, so to speak, figuratively or literally. Yeah.
Couldn't the thief also be Satan? The devil's not going to stand up and go, here I am, whatever. But if you're not prepared or ready, the thief can get you.
Yeah, you could use the thief to illustrate the devil, but it's not what is in this place, because he says in verse 40, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So the thief comes at an hour you don't expect. The thief comes at an hour when the master of the house doesn't expect. And in the same way, the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not expect. But that it would be a very appropriate illustration for the devil too, because he does work like that. Same way. Deception, catching people off guard, things like that. And what he says in verse 39 is just common sense. If the master knew when he's coming, he's not going to go anywhere that night. And he's not going to go to bed that night, probably. He's going to be waiting, ironically, just like the previous illustration. He's going to be up and waiting for when that thief. If it was today, he'd be waiting, sitting on the porch with a shotgun in his lap. That kind of thing. So, again, Jesus tells a parable similar to that concept too, of that the master would not just, let his house be broken into. If he knew when the thief was coming, he's going to be prepared for when the thief comes. So, in the same way, we need to be prepared, but we don't know when the thief is coming, so we need to just be prepared, period. Always be ready for that eventuality, because it could happen. It could happen tonight. It could happen. You may never have to deal with a thief breaking into your home for your whole life. And we may not ever have to deal with Jesus returning in our whole lives. He may come after we die.
But we know
But we know that he is going to, and it could be, not just in our lifetime, it could be tonight. So if it could be tonight, I better be ready tonight. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, with the series of lessons you've given on prayer and how God answers, I still, you know, in my mind, it's dealing specifically with knowing what God expects us. In other words, the test is almost an open book. The scripture that says, if it were not so, I would have told you. Everything we need to know is in here. And the preparation is keeping the blood of Christ continually will wash us and then continually washing us.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what preparation is. Now our deeds will follow us. But
Yeah.
it's not that hard to get prepared.
To know what we need to do to be prepared, God has given us all of that. He's given us everything. And in that sense, it's not strictly like an open book, even though I've described it that way many times. It's like an open book test. In a way, it's not like an open book test, but yet it is like the teacher giving you the answer sheet, before. Not going to let you use the answer sheet on the day of the test, but here's the answer sheet. You can have it for a week. The test is a week from today. Here you go. Or the test, I don't know, it's going to be a surprise when the test is. But here's the answer sheet, and you can keep the answer sheet until the test, the time to take the test.
I just remember hearing from an older Christian in the church who said his fear was that he had missed something in the Bible that he needed to know in order to get into heaven. And I thought that totally goes against the promise that Jesus made. If you're seeking for him, you're going to find him.
Mm-hmm.
There is no excuse for people not knowing what God expects.
Yeah. He's given us His Word.
It's sad that somebody, I'm like, well,
But, that's a well-intentioned fear, I guess, for the most part. He wants to make sure that he knows what he needs to know. So, as far as that goes,
yeah, but then that knocks out John when it goes, you're going to know you're saved. I mean,
yeah.
can't have it both ways.
And yet,
Just saying.
it is a legitimate concern to make sure that you know all that you need to know, I would say. You can still trust and rely on God that you will find it, knowing that you'll find it when you seek it. But
If you seek it, you just
Yeah.
have to constantly keep seeking. You can't just close the book because you think you know it all.
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Once you close the book, you're not seeking anymore. So,
He's saying this though because the tendency for many, many humans is to want to procrastinate, or I want to just mess around and play, and then when I get the deadline pressure or I know I really have to buckle down, I'll do it then. But he's saying that you can't do that because you don't know when it's going to be. But
Yeah, you
that's
can't
what
do that.
People like to do. Like, I just want to play and have fun, and then I'll figure that out later. Then I'll do the
Yep.
serious stuff later. Like that's what most people.
I don't know what it is that makes that so appealing, but we do it all the time. Some of us more than others, and some of us might do it in some areas and not in other areas. But there's something that draws us towards that. Even if we've learned our lessons so many times, like in school, you wait till the night before the test. Sure, you could pass it if you're one of those school-loving nerds like some people back there who unashamedly waited until the last minute to study and still aced the test every time. I wasn't blessed like that. And, not to be totally fair to myself or true with myself, I didn't try nearly as hard as I should have tried in school. But it's possible in normal things of life like that to wait until the last minute and still get by. But when you don't know when that test is going to be, or if you're expecting it to be next week and it turns out the teacher says, change of plans, we're taking it today, then it's like, oh boy, I have really messed up because I was expecting it to be next week, and now I was going to wait until the earlier next week to start preparing, and now I've blown it. So if we're expecting Jesus, like I feel like most Christians have in the back of their minds this voice that tells them, there's no way Jesus is coming back in your lifetime. Look how long it's been. What are the odds that He comes back in your remaining lifetime? And so that voice, even if we don't consciously think of it like that, we may be delaying for that reason, subconsciously thinking that it's not going to come. But at the same time, we don't know when our life's going to end either. So whether Jesus comes back or not, we may go to Him before He comes back to us.
You know, when you stop to think about the phrase deadline, I mean, it means, it's such a final term. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And people, it's the hardest thing to get in people's heads. I know when we did grants, right? The money was in DC. If you wanted it, you got the grant in by the deadline. When they closed the portal, it was over. There wasn't any appeal. It was done. But people got so used to, well, I'm a professor, I can do this, I can do that. It's like, I'm sorry. When the deadline hits, it's over. And I think that's what life is.
Yep. We've got to be ready for that deadline, especially when you don't know when the deadline is.
Exactly.
That's the way it will be. So the best thing to do is to be ready, act like the deadline is today. So the next one, verses 41 through 46. Peter said, Lord, are you telling this parable for all of us? For us or for all? And the Lord said, there's Luke, 7th time he's called Jesus the Lord in that way. Who then is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master's delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. So I think we pretty much touched on all this in the last, just now in discussing the other one. Delay, my master's delay, just like I mentioned, in that voice in the back of our heads. So I don't think it's relevant what the servants do. It's the fact that they're doing it because they say, my master's delayed. And so I don't have to worry about him getting back anytime soon because he's not coming anytime soon. He's coming later. And so for now, I'm going to do whatever I want. And then, when it gets closer to time, then I'll worry about it. Just like if you work at a place and the boss is going to come in, and the place you're not doing some of your checklist of responsibilities or whatever. It looks yucky, hadn't vacuumed or swept or anything, and they're coming in later this afternoon, but you don't want to mess with that now, so they'll just wait because they're not coming in until later, and then I'll deal with it then. But then they show up a few hours early. Same thing with the test being prepared in that way. So he says, blessed is the servant whom his master finds so doing, that is, has been set over his household, and they honor their responsibilities rightly, honorably. So finally, in this section at least, the last two verses. And that servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. The older versions say many stripes, few stripes. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Knowledgeable servant, ignorant servant. And we'll get to that in just a second in more detail before we run out of time. So Peter wanted to know in verse 41, Lord, is this for us or for everybody? Apparently, I don't know if Jesus ignored that or what. But he doesn't answer his question. It was a multiple choice question. Lord, are you telling this parable A, for us, or B, for everybody? And Jesus says, anyway, who then is the faithful and wise manager? And he just goes on. There may be an implied answer there, but he says, by implication, seems to be everybody. Not just the apostles, but everybody. Applies to everybody. Generally, specifically, it also applies to us. The Lord had given them much, and therefore He would require much from them. Same for us. He's given us all different abilities, and our responsibilities are in proportion to our abilities. That's the point of the parable of the talents. This here does parallel nicely with the parable of the talents, because the whole point of the parable of the talents is responsibilities in proportion to, or the fruit that they bore was in proportion to what they were given. The one who was given 5 talents got 5 more. One who was given 2 talents, 2 more. And then the one who was given the 1 talent didn't get any more. So that's not the way the parable of the pounds is, although it's very common for people to confuse the two and think that they're the same thing, but they're very, very crucial differences. But anyway, here, it's for everybody. It applies to everybody. Now, here's a question for us that will occupy more than the rest of our time, although could occupy more than the rest of our time. Are there different degrees of punishment in hell? What a loaded one there. This is one of those questions you just don't bring up in Bible class. You wait till you're sitting at home to talk about that with somebody in private. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to bring it up here. Did the Lord teach the principle of degrees of punishment? Well, let's look again at verses 47 and 48. The servant who knew his master's will, but didn't get ready and didn't act according to that will, he'll be beaten with many stripes. Knew master's will, did not do master's will, many stripes. But the one who did not know and didn't do it, to paraphrase, will be beaten with few stripes.
It's the same as when he says, like, it would be better to have never known than to know and turn away like a dog.
Yeah, it's that perfectly corroborates this. Perfect harmony. It's not exactly the same teaching, but they're perfectly in harmony with each other, because by this statement, a light beating, I think anybody would agree, a light beating is better than a severe beating. So the one who doesn't know is better off than the one who did know and didn't do it. Neither one of them did the will of the master, but the one that knew the master's will when he didn't do it will be punished more severely. I don't see, considering all of these parabolic teachings are in reference to eternity and Judgment Day, there's nothing to do with these 2 verses but to apply them also to Judgment Day and to eternity. So if you knew the master's will and didn't act according to his will, that's a severe beating. But if you didn't know and still did what deserved a beating, still disobeyed the master, still receive a beating, that's the key. Still a beating, still punished, but not to the same degree. Yep.
Here is the issue that bothers me with that. And that is, heaven is where God is. Hell is where God is not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have no concept of not being somewhere where God is not. I mean, the sun shines on the just and the unjust here on earth. So we never know, like your song, where no one stands alone. Here, it's not happening. There, I mean, if you're miserable, just how miserable can you get?
Yeah, for the first time, people will know what that really feels like.
And it's a terrifying thought
Mm-hmm.
of not being near God or with Him, because just being in His presence is a blessing. So therefore, I don't know how to shelve this except for the fact that I can't shelve it, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I'm following exactly what you mean, but we see the degrees of punishment in these verses. I guess it's a matter of applying them to hell, maybe, or to eternity that may cause the difficulty. But there are other passages of Scripture that might help us or shed light on it, such as Hebrews 10, 26 through 29. The Hebrews writer said, "For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment, do you think, will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which He was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace?" What is the significance of the phrase worse punishment? Again, the implication seems pretty clear when we put those two verses together. Somebody who has set aside the law of Moses, what's the punishment? They die without mercy, according to his words. Of course, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So they die without mercy. We'd call that a pretty harsh punishment, I'd say. There are very few crimes that a person can commit in 21st century USA that will bear that punishment, according to the legal system. How much worse punishment, then, will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God, which is directly related to what he said at the beginning of those verses. If we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, which is exactly what Jesus says in verse 47, the servant who knew his master's will but still didn't do it anyway. Severe beating versus a light beating. So we see the degrees. We may, just like we have trouble applying many things and understanding many things to eternity because we've never been in eternity, so we don't know what it is like, we do at least see the degrees of punishment in the way it's going to be. Mm-hmm.
Could it be a personal feeling of it hurts more? Whenever you've had something and it's been taken away from you, then you know what you're missing. It hurts. If you've never known it and it's taken away, it doesn't hurt you. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I have.
It's the way the person perceives it, not.
I think that may be an element of it. I don't think there's any way to get around, from my current human perspective anyway, I don't think there's any getting around the possibility or likelihood that will be a part of it. And the same thing with the question, the other side of the coin of, are there different degrees of reward in heaven? Which is usually the more controversial of the two questions. And spoiler alert, I believe the Scriptures clearly teach yes to that one as well. If there are degrees in punishment in hell, it only makes sense that the other side is true as well, although a lot of people don't like the thought of that, and usually the objections stem from the fact that they don't think they're going to get as good a rewards as other people, so they want all the rewards to be the same. And appeal is usually made to the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, which is based on a misconception of the purpose of that parable in the first place. But
You know, your comment, you know, there's always that whole discussion, are there degrees of sin? Is a guy that commits heinous murder and kills 30 people versus one that tells the white lie, you know, the degree of sin. But everything that we've looked at so far here has nothing to do with sin. It's whether you knew the truth and left it versus you didn't know it at all.
yeah,
And that's the whole, there's a big difference there, that versus the degrees of sin.
yeah, very much. You know, we talk about sins of omission versus sins of commission. I think usually we would say commission's worse. Sins of commission are worse because that's when you actually did something that is not good. Whereas omission, you didn't do something, and we would judge that as lesser than the commission. But Jesus here, if anything, is talking about sins of omission. He's talking about things that you did not do, or you just did not obey the Master's will, you did not do according to His will, or I guess he could have done other than the Master's will. But again, the key is knowing and not doing equals severe beating, not knowing and not doing equals light beating.
The difficulty with pushing these concepts too far is that we think we can earn heaven, and we can't. No one earns. And it is true that sins have there are varying sins and varying degrees of consequences of sin. But it's also true that the vilest of sinner can be saved.
Yep.
And the goodest of goods can be lost.
Mm-hmm.
If they think they're the ones making and I know you don't have time to get into it because it's wrong anyway, but your view of the one parable you mentioned, but
The pounds.
we won't go there. The hours, wasn't it?
The parable of the pounds.
No, when they come.
Bridegroom, are they waiting?
No, when the workers.
Oh, the laborers in the vineyard.
But, and we've got to be careful that we balance these illustrations with, other clear teachings of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And so while there are degrees, that shouldn't be a motivator or a demotivator. It's saying that God knows what He's doing with every human being.
Mm-hmm.
We can't figure it out. You let the great judge judge. And it's His scale. There's no sliding scale of salvation. It's you are or you aren't.
Yep.
And when Joe talked about early on, or when she said she's ready, the only drawback in my mind, I'm ready, I'm ready to go to sleep too. But anyway, the only not from the lesson, just
I get it.
just from a week of camp. But the only drawback is for those who aren't ready.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of them, might be the young man that down at camp that thinks he's, that says, well, what would be different for me tomorrow if I were baptized? And it's like, there's a big difference because you're not good enough to make it without it. And so anything that would, I just think we need to be careful that we push it too far.
Yeah, I agree. We don't, some of the parables we can take details so far that we miss the point of the parable. But in places like this, yes, it's an illustration, but we also have to keep in mind that he's illustrating something. And he's in the context of being ready for eternity. And while it shouldn't be a deterrent or a motivator, either way, from one side of the coin, Jesus still said this, and he had to have had a reason to say to inform them and us that the one who knew his master's will and still didn't do it will receive a severe beating, whereas the one who didn't know and did what deserved the beating will receive a light beating. He wanted us to know that, and it's useful information.
Most people studying would probably fall in the category of they know the master's will, and so like that is a.
Yeah, if we're reading this,
I'm gonna be in that.
it's like one of these. If you're reading this, then you can know that I'm dead, or that I'm gone, or whatever. If we're reading this, we know that there's a good chance we know what he's talking about, knowing.
A severe condemnation is when James says, "For him that knows to do good and does not, it is sin."
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, just like you said, the sin of omission could very, very likely be a bigger sin because you had knowledge the whole time and you did nothing about it.
Yep.
Why does this have to be an analogy of the afterlife? When we're here on earth, people face consequences of sin all the time.
Yeah.
And in comparison to afterlife, that's a light beating. Look at Moses. I mean, he didn't get to go into the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
He could only see it from afar. But he got into heaven.
It doesn't.
Got
It
into heaven.
doesn't have to be about the afterlife, other than the fact that it is, because Jesus. That's what he's talking about.
Well, but, okay, look in Hebrews 4.
Or if we don't want to say he's talking about the afterlife, he's talking about Judgment Day, when the punishment for eternity will be pronounced. So the judgment is going to be more severe for those who knew the Master's will and didn't do it, as opposed to those who didn't know the Master's will and didn't do it.
The context of this reading tells you.
It's all about being ready for that day when judgment is to come.
Again, taking it too far is like you said with the thief. Obviously, he's referencing the return, but Jesus is in no way a thief.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to, and Thessalonians tells us he's going to come like a thief in the night. So, for someone to read that and say, well, it says he's a thief. It's like, yes, but that's not what he's saying.
Yeah, because he doesn't say he's a thief. He says he's going to come at an hour when you don't expect, like the thief does.
There's no thief that's ever left a calling card that says, I'll be back at 6 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, he doesn't say I'm like a thief. He says the thief comes when it's not expected, and I'm going to come when it's not expected. So what he says in verses 47 to 48 doesn't really have any logical significance or meaning whatsoever if it's not in the context of everything else that he said, which is to be ready for the day when he returns, which is Judgment Day. Yeah, Wayne?
One thing we know for sure, there is no doubt there is a heaven and a hell. Only two options.
Mm-hmm.
With these two people, they're going to be where they don't want to be. Now, I believe there's degrees there, but for those who don't, it doesn't make a difference. They're in the wrong place. And with heaven, it doesn't make any difference degrees, however I believe there is, because just like here on earth, there are people who assemble tonight. How many people could be here, but they don't desire the fellowship? If you don't desire here, your desire is going to be waned in heaven.
Yeah.
You won't enjoy Moses. You won't enjoy to the extent that your attitude here developed for that.
Yeah, the harder you work for something in life, the sweeter it is when you finally achieve it. Of course, we're using human terms and earthly terms of, earn it, work for it, and achieve it and everything. But that's just a principle of human existence, that the more you are devoted and dedicated to something, the sweeter it is when it comes and when it arrives and when you have it. So, but like Wayne said, this shouldn't be the motivator here is not, well, I think I can handle a light beating. So the point is, what these two things have in common is they didn't do the Master's will. He adds the knowledge, and I'm glad that he did, that it's going to be worse for the one who knows it. And that the big, hammer drop on that is, wait a minute, I know. So I need to understand that now that I know, if I neglect it, I'm in even deeper than, before I ever knew. Just like Peter said, it'll be better for that person if they never believed than to believe and then to go back, like Demas did when Paul said, Demas has forsaken me, he's in love with this present world. The point is, neither one of these people did the master's will. He's saying the ones that will be blessed are the servants who do the master's will. And the only way they're going to be able to do it properly and completely is if they know it. So it's implied that the one who does it will know it. But that's what we need to take from that, is we need to be doing the master's will, because I don't want a light or a severe beating. If those are my only two options, I'm going to take the light one, obviously. But thankfully, those are not my only two options. Those are just the only two options if I choose and resolve to not do the master's will. But I have another option, and that other option is to do the master's will, is to be about the master's business and to get ready, which is the admonition and warning or whatever, the encouragement of all of these little parabolic sections. So what determines the degree, to use this language of our lesson here, the degree to which you took advantage of the privilege and opportunity with which you were blessed to live in the first place. I have different abilities than you have. God does not expect me to punch over my weight. He doesn't expect me to do more than He has given me the ability to do. Now, He does expect me to grow, but He doesn't expect me to do more than I'm able to do. But He does expect me to do what I'm able to do. And that is the key to the parable of the talents, or the point of that parable is, He didn't, when the one that brought the 2 back, He gave them 2, he brought back 2, He didn't say, hey, this guy got 5. Why didn't you get 5? But the same blessing, the same reward was given to them, because 5 got 5, 2 got 2, and the 1 should have gotten 1 to follow that pattern. Because they reaped according to what they had been given by their master. That's where it differs from the pounds, where they were all given the same amount, and their rewards were in proportion to what they brought back. But the key is, what am I able to do? Am I acting in accordance with that ability? Not your ability, but my ability. Am I taking advantage of the opportunities that God presents me with, according to the talents and abilities that God has given me to do? Am I doing anything to try to grow in my talents and abilities and expand? There's nothing wrong with starting in your comfort zone, but there is something wrong with staying there forever. Might stay there for a long time, but to learn to expand, to branch out, that is a very important part of, I guess, Christian life in general. So, are we ready? Is the question. Am I ready? We don't know when Jesus is coming. So just be ready.
I really like the way in Hebrews 4, for good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. At the benefit of hearing the message, putting it in you, and sharing by faith, believing that God will do what He says, with others who listened. And He's talking about the rest, which is heaven. I mean, that's essentially, in a lot of ways, we have heaven on earth, but we don't see it.
Yeah.
Or we don't recognize it when it's right in front of our eyes, which is sad.
Yep, there's an alternate reading to that verse where the message didn't benefit them because the hearing of the message wasn't united with faith. So they heard it, but they didn't pair it with faith, and therefore they didn't get anything. Didn't benefit them at all, even though the message that they heard would have been the best thing that they could ever have gotten, but it didn't do them any good because they didn't pair it with faith. They didn't pair it with submission, obedience, and all these other terms that are generally synonymous with obedience. Yeah, that's how the ESV reads.
Well, that's why you don't forsake assembling with brothers and sisters.
Yeah. The implication of that reading would be the others did it did benefit them because they received it in a different way. I guess they received it, period. And those others didn't benefit them because they were of another sort. And we can't help but think that these many of thousands of people that were there listening to Jesus, that applied to them too. There were probably those who heard everything Jesus said, the exact same things that these others heard that he said, benefited these, didn't benefit these, and that would be the reason why, because what they did with it and how they received it and whether they took it to heart, and instead of just stopping it with their ears, it sunk in and that seed was planted. So the key for us, the application is be ready. Simple as that. Be ready because you don't know, and to be ready means to be about doing what the Master expects us to do according to what the Master has given us to be able to do. So as long as we're doing in accordance with our ability, that's all God expects and wants. And hopefully our abilities will grow, and as our abilities grow, our doing should grow. And take advantage of the opportunities, and don't be afraid to go above and beyond, knowing that even when you fail, you still succeed because you tried, you put forth the effort and are striving to do God's will.